Okay, good morning, everyone. It's great to see all of you, and welcome to our June Investment Committee meeting. Let's see, let's go ahead and take the roll. I think we have Steve on to take our roll. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Okay, so Ms. Bradford?
Here.
Ms. Hendricks?
Here.
Mr. Keeley?
Present.
Ms. Erden?
Here.
Ms. Yamamoto?
Here.
Okay, for the Director of Finance, Ms. Whitaker? Oh, sorry, Ms. Miller.
No worries. Here. Thank you.
Good morning. For the State Treasurer, Mr. Seha?
Good morning.
Good morning. Controller Yi?
Here.
Good morning. Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
I'm here.
Mr. Prezant, I'm sorry, Mr. Prezant is here as well. My apology.
Sorry, this is Keith for the superintendent.
Very good. Thank you. My apology.
Steve, you need to go have another cup of coffee.
And turn over the page of your list.
Will
Okay.
do.
Thank you, Steve, and my apologies to Bill and Keith for that. So before we start, I just have some notes for the committee and for the members of the public. The board will have a 10-minute public comment period at the end of each agenda item. The comment after each item is limited to that particular agenda item topic. We'll also have an additional opportunity for statements from the public for items not pertaining to a specific agenda item, which we will be opening up shortly. Individuals who wish to speak at the board web conference should dial into the public comment line, which is 833-986-0555, and wait in the call-in queue. Each speaker is allowed a maximum of 3 minutes for their presentation. However, if there's not enough time for speakers to have 3 minutes due to the length of the public comment period, then that timing may be modified at the chair's discretion. In addition, Teachers Retirement Board meetings are live web streamed and video archived, which are available to the public on calstrs.com. To protect the privacy of minors who wish to address the board, public commenters under the age of 18 should only state their name and affiliated organization, but shouldn't share any personal identifying information such as their last name, their age, or their school. So now we'll move on to our agenda. Our first agenda item is just to approve the committee agenda. Are there any changes or modifications to the agenda? Okay, let's see, all those in favor, I'm sorry, can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So I think it was moved by the controller and seconded by Gail. Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
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 Hi.
Any opposed or abstentions? Okay, thank you. We'll move to agenda item number 2, which was we'll take opportunities for statements from the public. Just a reminder that we will have posted a timer, which is the timing for each member of the public to make their statement. And I'll turn it over to Samantha from our team to introduce the callers. Samantha?
And I believe we're having a 2-minute timer.
Yeah, we'll do a 2-minute timer, I think, based on the number of speakers that we have. And I'm sorry, Samantha, actually, before we open it up to the speakers, there was some additional information I wanted to provide to the committee about public comment that we've received. So in addition to the speakers who are in the comment line, we also always accept public comment, both verbally, as we'll hear today, as well as in writing. Before we take the verbal comments, I just want to summarize some of the written communication that the board's received since our March meeting. We have been the recipient of form letter campaigns. We continue to receive letters from a campaign that's managed by Fossil Free California. Since our March board meeting, we've received 74 letters regarding divestment and 1,972 form emails since the end of February urging divestment from Enbridge, which owns and operates an oil sand pipeline in the United States and Canada. In addition, there have been other communications that we've received from members of the public on a number of other topics. We have received 24 communications asking CalSTRS not to divest from fossil fuels, with 20 of these communications coming from our CalSTRS members. We have received some communications regarding questions about a private equity partner of CalSTRS, BC Partners, and their management of PetSmart. Investment staff has been in contact with BC Partners previously over many of the claims made in the letter, and our external affairs staff is responding to the letter to meet with the interested parties to listen to their concerns. And then finally, CalSTRS has received an email which shared several UTLA regions that have passed motions, which included calls for divestment from Israel. But to date, CalSTRS has not received any additional communication on this. So thank you, Samantha. I just wanted to share that information with the committee about some of the written communications that we'd received. And so now we'll go to the public comment line.
Okay, our first caller is Diana. Diana, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. My name is Diana Curiel. I'm a member of CTA NEA retired and a CalSTRS member. I'm speaking on behalf of myself and another CalSTRS member, Park Guthrie, an active member of CTA. We greatly appreciate the work CalSTRS does to manage our pension funds and thank Jack Henis for his many years of service and dedication. However, as CTA members, we're concerned about some of the communication which is conveyed from the CIO, Chris Ailman, to the members through the Retirement Committee. The April 2021 CTA Retirement Committee report references Chris Ailman's words. I had a longer presentation prepared, so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Let's see. We're going to talk about Mr. Ailman's comments on tobacco divestment, which appeared in the report. This is a quote. He shared that when CalSTRS divested from tobacco 10 years ago, the CalSTRS fund lost $5 billion and tobacco stocks increased, unquote. This appears to be a misstatement or an exaggeration based on a CalSTRS investment report dated June 30th, 2020. A section titled The Cost of Divestment gives details, quote, as of June 30th, 2020, CalSTRS had divestment mandates for tobacco, Sudan, Iran firearms, thermal coal, and private prisons, unquote. The CalSTRS report then goes on to say that since 2010, during which time CalSTRS divested from tobacco, firearms, thermal coal, and private prisons, the loss to the fund was roughly $2.28 billion. So if Mr. Ailman is referring to this period of time from to the present, then he has exaggerated the amount of loss to the fund by $2.72 billion and conflated tobacco divestment with 3 other funds. The report goes on to give more figures, and these also contradict Mr. Ailman's claim. CalSTRS board, please consider how you'll hold the fossil fuel industries you invest in accountable for a transition plan that starts now, reduces greenhouse gases within 9 years by 50%, and takes into account scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions.
Thank you for your comment. Our next caller will be Jen. Jen, go ahead.
Hello? Can you hear me? Hello?
Jen, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so my name is Jen. I'm an organizer in Minneapolis with a housing advocacy group called Renters United for Justice. And we've been organizing Havenbrook tenants here on the north side of Minneapolis, which is, I don't know how many of you all know about Minneapolis, but it's an underserved part of the city. And what we've seen with these Havenbrook tenants is a lot of these homes being neglected. A lot of these houses were bought up after the housing in 2008, the housing market crash. And the problem with these huge landlords buying up these homes in these cities that they don't even live in is that they're not investing in the community. And so I'm actually here on the call with Tiki and Ariana, and I don't want to take up too much time. I'd rather yield my time to them. But I will leave it at that. That's what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the Aries Management Havenbrook Homes. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Our next caller will be Ariana. Ariana, go ahead.
Okay, good morning. My name is Ariana. I have been a resident with Havenbrook Homes since 2014. Myself, my spouse, and my 5 children have not had a very pleasant living experience. We've experienced things like weird hidden fees and neglect on many levels, such as heat failure in the middle of the winter, electrical issues, ongoing electrical issues, leaks in the sink, tub, shower, and roof, and which led to mold. These issues were unresolved for many months. I tried several times to contact management about these issues and rarely got a response. And when they did contact me about these issues, I felt like an inconvenience to them. Or they neglected to respond to me at all or follow up with me at all. When they did come out, they have fixed things, It got so bad I had to get a city inspector involved. Back in March, the city inspector did a virtual tour. She failed them, gave them 30 days to fix the issues. They came out, fixed probably one thing out of 15, came back 30 days later. She failed them again. She gave them another time frame to fix those things. She came back out last week and failed them again. These are the conditions that we have been living with for many years. And it's not easy to move in the middle of a pandemic. 2 out of my 5 children have respiratory issues, and the mold is contributing to that. Thank you for the opportunity to, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you for your comments. Our next caller will be Jim. Jim, go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jim Baker with the Private Equity Stakeholder Project. To provide a bit of context to the previous callers, CalSTRS is a major investor with Aries Management, a private equity firm. CalSTRS has committed more than $500 million to Aries in the last year across multiple asset classes. Aries last year partnered with Freddie and Partners to acquire Front Yard Residential, also called Havenbrook Homes, a single-family rental landlord with nearly 15,000 homes around the U.S. The company has filed more than 500 eviction actions since the beginning of this year, including more than 390 eviction filings in majority Black, DeKalb, and Clayton counties in Georgia. So in addition to the issues that residents were speaking about from Minnesota, we're also seeing Front Yard / Havenbrook filing to evict residents at much higher rates in majority Black counties than majority white counties. So since January 1st, 2021, the firm has filed to evict 16% of its residents in Clayton County, Georgia, and 18% in DeKalb County, Georgia. In order to protect Americans from contracting and spreading COVID-19, the CDC put in place an eviction moratorium that's been extended through through the end of June, and has also made $52 billion in rental assistance available for residents. In March, the Federal Trade Commission and Consumer Financial Protection Bureau stated that they would be investigating evictions by multi-state landlords and private equity firms. We've reached out to Aries several times to discuss eviction filings by Front Yard and Havenbrook, but Aries has not responded. The company's eviction filings, and particularly its disproportionate filings against Black renters, have drawn media coverage in Bloomberg, CBS News, NPR, Reuters, and clearly present a substantial headline risk. Aries Management's failure to address or even respond to questions about its company's eviction actions represents a significant management failure on Aries' part, one that CalSTRS should be concerned about given its recent investment of $500 million with Aries.
Thank you for your comments.
Given the scope of we would ask that
Our next caller is Tiki. Tiki, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Tiki Cross, and I'm a renter from Havenbrook, and I've been with them for 3 years. And the whole 3 years been horrible. I had my furnace went out. It was off for like almost 2 months. I had rodents in my house, like not in my house, but in my walls. I had raccoons and squirrels. They just got a hold to that now, but it took so long for them to get a hold of that. And then I got my doors, my windows don't have any locks on them. Like, it's not safe. Like my one friend said, it's hard to move during the pandemic. And, you know, when you don't got the support that you need, but these people still want your money and they still threaten you with all these demands, but you can't get the demands that you want met from them. And it'd be so minor stuff. So it's a lot of stuff that I learned how to repair on my own from YouTube. So, you know, I just don't think they should be doing people like this, especially good people. You know, people out here struggling, trying to make ends meet. And it's just a slap in the face when no one shows you no support, not even from the person that you're renting from, you know? And I'm just fed up with a lot of stuff, and I'm just so tired of it. And it's time for a change. Like, seriously. I don't want to say too much. I don't want to run out of time or get kicked off the call, you know? So I just want to know how can we make this situation? What could you guys give us any kind of information to make our situation better? Because it's hard out here. And then like June, after the end of the month, they're going to be trying to evict everybody. And, you know, I just need someone to show support for all of us. So if someone's there for us, please be for us. And thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comment. Our next caller is Paula. Paula, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Paula Buell. I'm a retired teacher and a CalSTRS member. And I want to thank the board and staff because I know you take a lot of care and work hard to manage our pensions. I also want you to take seriously, I'm one of the more than 1,200 teachers and concerned citizens who sent those letters asking you to divest over $103 million from Enbridge. For those who haven't heard much about Enbridge, it's a company that's very environmentally irresponsible. It's building the Line 3 pipeline expansion in Minnesota, and it's near the headwaters of the Mississippi River. It has a long track record of large and small oil spills. In 1991, Line 3 spilled 1.7 million gallons of crude oil onto the Prairie River. And its safety record isn't the only thing wrong with Line 3. The route disregards native sovereignty, and it crosses land that was guaranteed to the Anishinaabe people in U.S. government treaties on several occasions. CalSTRS insists that engagement is the best way to work with fossil fuel companies, but that strategy can only work if there are clear consequences for non-compliance. With Enbridge, the first condition would have to be an immediate and permanent halt to the construction on Line 3. It's unlikely that divesting from Enbridge would have a negative financial impact for CalSTRS. There's mounting evidence that fossil fuel investments are more likely to lose money than make it. I hope you'll listen to my voice alongside thousands of other teachers across the state, the 1,200 plus who sent you the letter about Enbridge, and the more than 175,000 who've passed divestment resolutions in their local unions. We need our pension fund to be fiscally and morally responsible. We care about our children's future, and we've placed our trust in you. Now it's your turn to be worthy of that trust. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. Our next caller is Naomi. Naomi, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Naomi. I'm a member of the climate justice group Youth versus Apocalypse, and I'm also calling to encourage the CalSTRS board to divest the over $100 million in Enbridge investments, the company trying to expand the Line 3 pipeline. Right now, members of Youth versus Apocalypse are out at Line 3 standing with water protectors to protest because Line 3 would contribute to climate change and violate the treaty rights of Indigenous people. And by continuing to invest in Enbridge, CalSTRS is complicit in the environmental damage and the harm to Indigenous people and land that will be caused by Line 3. As a California student, I know that my teachers want the best for their students and our futures. Yet by investing in Enbridge and investing more than $6 billion in the fossil fuel industry, teachers' money is being used to fund environmental racism and destruction. I hope that under new CEO with Knox leadership, CalSTRS will divest from Enbridge and the fossil fuel industry and invest in the future of the youth and the planet. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comment. Our next caller is Lynn. Lynn, go ahead.
I'm Lynn Nittler, a retired teacher. Thank you for guarding my pension. The news lately is breaking my heart. First, in May, every year, the scientists at Mauna Loa, Hawaii, announce the level of CO2 in our atmosphere, and every year it climbs dangerously higher. We reached 419 parts per million of CO2 this year, accelerating our climb toward an unlivable planet. The rising levels of CO2 have shifted our California climate, making it hotter and drier. Thus, we face water cutbacks and the threats of fires this summer. Second, last week, a report by the National Park Service scientists found that the 2020 Castle Fire decimated California's population of ancient trees, destroying up to a tenth of the world's mature giant sequoia trees, possibly 10,000 of them. Their verdict: 100 years of fire suppression combined with climate change-driven hotter droughts have changed how fires burn in the Southern Sierra, and that is deadly for the sequoias. Third, this week, we learn of another broken treaty, and CalSTRS is implicated. For the past 7 years, Indigenous communities across the Midwest have been working to shut down the Enbridge Line 3 pipeline because it violates treaties and leads to this destruction for the land, water, and climate. Enbridge, a Canadian energy company, believes they have the right to reroute their aging pipeline through lands granted to the Ojibwe in treaties that protect their rights to hunt, fish, and gather. Enbridge is building Line 3 to move 750 barrels a day of Alberta tar sands oil, some of the world's heaviest crude, right through sensitive Ojibwe land. The fragile ecosystem of lakes, rivers, and wild rice beds will be endangered. Thousands of Indigenous and environmental and faith groups have joined the water protectors. Hundreds have been arrested for civil disobedience as they protested the ecological threat the pipeline poses to people, land, and climate. Unfortunately, I discovered CalSTRS invests in Enbridge to the tune of over $4 million. Please divest immediately to protect Indigenous rights and the climate. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Our next caller will be Kevin.
Good morning. My name is Kevin Welch, and I represent the California Teacher Association. We wanted to thank CalSTRS for allowing public discourse on these very important topics. As a matter of policy, CTA believes that retirement systems, CalSTRS and CalPERS, should be invested objectively, safely, and prudently with diversification. These systems should have as their primary investment goals to preserve the principal and maximize growth and income when selecting and retaining securities to ensure all CTA members are able to retire with dignity. Additionally, CalSTRS uses engagement of companies through educated dialogue and good corporate governance, which has proven to be more productive than divestment in accomplishing the goals of achieving retirement security for our over 300,000 members and pushing companies to be responsible corporate citizens. Encouraging divestment at a time that the plan has an unfunded liability is fiduciarily irresponsible. An example of the tremendous power of corporate engagement occurred recently at the ExxonMobil annual shareholder meeting with the election of 3 new directors that were backed by CalSTRS from the beginning. CalSTRS has called for change at ExxonMobil, and many of the largest investors in the world followed suit. We believe that this historic vote represents a tipping point for companies unprepared for the global energy transition and showcases the progress that CalSTRS can help achieve via shareholder engagement that meets their fiduciary obligations, while also encouraging the smart global energy transition. CTA believes that these actions show that shareholders have the power to affect change at even the most resistant companies and contribute to the sustainable value of their investments and that CalSTRS will continue to actively engage companies in their portfolio to prepare for the global transition while maximizing returns for California's educators. All that being said, we must ensure that our members have a dependable retirement they can count on. CalSTRS has fiduciary responsibility over the investments of retirement plan assets and is required to discharge its duties solely in the interest of its members and beneficiaries for the exclusive purpose of providing benefits. We believe our retirement system should have as their primary investment goals to preserve the principles and maximize the growth and income when selecting and retaining securities. To that end, CalSTRS has been very steady, long-term, diversified investment strategy. Divestment is not a responsible investment. The constitutional charge of CalSTRS fiduciaries is to ensure that the funds meet its financial.
Our next caller will be Joan. Joan, go ahead.
Good morning, CalSTRS. Good morning, CalSTRS board and staff. Good morning, other speakers. I just want to honor the speakers from Havenbrook Homes. Thank you for your comments. My heart is touched by your situation. I'm a beneficiary of a CalSTRS retirement income. For years, you CalSTRS staff, executives, and board members have stated that CalSTRS has a fiduciary duty to stay invested in fossil fuels. Jack Ennis, Chris Ailman, other CalSTRS executives have made this position clear at board meetings and public statements. This is a core belief that has been echoed by some CalSTRS board members. Fiduciary duty to stay invested in fossil fuels has been conventional wisdom at CalSTRS. This belief shapes your rhetoric and drives your decision-making. Can CalSTRS staff and board members value data that directly contradicts this deeply held paradigm about fossil fuel investing? Last year, Wall Street firms Makeda and BlackRock were hired to study fossil fuel divestment from New York public pensions. The Makeda and BlackRock analysts are not passionate teachers or environmentalists. They are some of the biggest names in the financial world. BlackRock examined divestment actions by hundreds of funds worldwide. Not a single investor experienced negative performance from divestment. None of the funds suffered financially, and some experienced improved financial health as a result of divestment. The BlackRock study concluded that divested portfolios outperformed their benchmarks. The Makeda study found similar results. Is it possible that CalSTRS conventional wisdom on fossil fuel divestment is wrong? Is it possible that there is no fiduciary duty to stay invested in fossil fuels? We all have perceptual filters which confirm pre-existing worldviews. If the core CalSTRS belief about fossil fuel investing is wrong, how might you as CalSTRS staff and board members respond? Have you challenged your own institutional and personal biases in your perceptions and decisions about fossil fuel divestment?
Thank you for your
Are there voices on?
Our next caller is Suzanne. Suzanne, go ahead.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Suzanne Hume, and I am a former teacher, a reading specialist, a literacy trainer, and a new teacher trainer, a member of CalSTRS, CalRTA, and now the director and founder of CleanEarthForKids.org. I began CleanEarthForKids.org after I was poisoned by toxic pesticides in my neighborhood. We need to all think about how we can support divestment of things that are harmful to our kids and our teachers. So after this horrible experience and my lungs being burned, standing next to an idling car hurts my lungs. I never noticed it before, but I do now. And that's why I began CleanEarthForKids.org. And we're currently working to get pesticides off of campuses because many toxic pesticides are being used here that are banned in many other countries. The United States only bans 15 pesticides, while in the UK, over 175 pesticides are banned. So very important to think about. We need to keep toxic chemicals and the burning of fossil fuels away from our kids. We must divest from fossil fuels, including Enbridge. This is a racial, social, climate, and environmental justice issue and a public health issue. We need to protect the air that our children breathe and the water that they
30
drink.
seconds.
Burning fossil fuels creates toxic air pollution. Asthma is the #1 reason why children miss school and the 3rd leading reason why children under 15 are hospitalized. And we've got to protect our climate. We need to think about our future. We've got to do this for our workers, our kids, and everybody. And we know what's going on with Line 3. We cannot participate in these actions. It's just not right.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Our next caller will be Ed. Ed, go ahead.
Yeah, Ed Folia.
Go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, I wish to address the board as a lifelong educator, grandparent, and practicing environmentalist. I am not alone in wishing that we were meeting in person, and I wish to give a big thank you to our outgoing CEO, Jack Ennis, for his years of service as CalSTRS CEO. 3 minutes is not enough time to show the recognition and appreciation for the work of Jack Ennis has given as CEO, especially in addressing global warming. There is no question that climate change is the most serious issue facing our planet. Under Jack's leadership, CalSTRS is meeting the challenges of climate change. He's accepted, with the board's help, the most effective way to influence change is to be at the table rather than being outside looking in. His leadership has been a team effort, using the power vested in shareholders to meet the change that even with most resistant companies. He has recognized these challenges associated with global warming can best met through meaningful engagement. An example of this was the recent issue of historic achievement with ExxonMobil, one of the largest fossil fuel groups in the world. They have, through the power of a shareholder, they have elected 3 new independent directors. This move has been extraordinary, and we wish to continue, hopefully, to be engaged, not walking away from the energy crisis through divestment. Thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you for your comments. Our last caller will be Jennifer. Jennifer, go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning. This is Jennifer Baker with the California Retired Teachers Association. Retired teachers are increasingly negatively impacted by Social Security offsets and holes in Medicare coverage, leaving many economically vulnerable, particularly in today's economy, which is increasing due to baby boomer retirements, who are the fastest growing population in California. Numerous divestment discussions have been taking place without consideration of indemnification to the fund, which would protect the retirement security of CalSTRS members. Throughout the last decade, the Great Recession and initial pandemic economy has wreaked havoc on the health and well-being of retirees. When divestment is proposed, it means current and future retired teachers would solely be held fiscally accountable for a statewide decision. Why should retired teachers who are disproportionately women without fiscal safety nets have their retirement security taxed without consideration to all of the residents of California? This issue is particularly concerning in an environment where the state has a $76 billion windfall And yet retired teachers are being asked to give up their retirement security without the rest of the state stepping up to the plate to provide their share of the cost. How would this strategy have helped to change the board of directors at Exxon? How is this strategy changing the driving habits of residents of our state and our nation? If we only work to force one group to change without working towards a collective goal, we're not going to truly create effective change. CalSTRS has long sought to engage with companies to change business practices systemically from the inside while ensuring their fiduciary duty to our members. These conversations have not been easy or popular, but they have resulted in CalSTRS being one of the global leaders for effective environmental change while reining in Wall Street so that you can be better stewards of retirees' pension security. PEPRA members, teachers hired after 2014, school districts and the state would bear increased retirement contributions from any shortfalls created through divestment. The negative fiscal impact of divestment could also jeopardize the long-term future of the supplemental benefit maintenance account, as changes in the assumed rate of return could lead to a reduction in the rate assumed for this fund as well. Any threat to the SBMA literally means leaving our most elderly retirees to the whims of inflation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. That concludes the callers that are in the queue.
Great. Thank you very much, Samantha. Thank you to all the members of the public who joined us today to share your concerns and your thoughts. Just want to also recognize those of you who came and shared the personal hardship that you've had in your homes in Minneapolis. And I'm directing our staff to follow up, with Mr. Baker and your group, just to better understand the situation and understand what role, if any, we have to play there. I want to thank while Mr. Folio was on to share comments around our investment strategy. He also recognized that it'll be our CEO Jack Enos's last meeting, and hopefully, Ed, you can join us tomorrow when I think we'll be able to take more time to talk about Jack's accomplishments while he's been here. Finally, there were a couple of commenters who raised the issue I mentioned earlier, where we have received form emails and form messages from many members of the public, specifically around Enbridge. And so I've asked our Chief Investment Officer, Chris Ailman. Chris, if you could come on the line. We just wanted to make sure that Chris could make some really brief remarks, just making sure people understand the facts about our investment in Enbridge. So Chris, I'll turn it to you, and then we'll move on with the agenda.
There we go. Thanks, Joy. First off, on the apartment complex or real estate complex in Minneapolis, we do not have direct exposure to that. I think Jim Baker mentioned Ares. We have hired Ares in the last year to run a private credit portfolio, so a different area, and we can raise. We certainly have talked to Jim in the past, and we'll raise this so Ares is aware. I think they've heard from him. And then on Enbridge, Joy, to clarify the comments from the public, we have about $120 million of stock in Enbridge. It's in the Canadian index. None of our active managers own it. It just happens to be in our non-US index and then our Canada specific index. And we have about $10 million in bonds. I think somebody referenced $4 million. That's our fixed income exposure with two managers. And we will review that from an ESG standpoint and have reviewed Line 3 and those issues. So we'll continue to engage with that company.
Great, thank you, Chris. So just wanted to confirm for those listening that the investments that we have are all passive investments that we have in our indexes. Okay, great. Thank you, Chris. Okay, so moving on in the agenda, we have two items on our consent agenda, action items, approval of our minutes, and the results of the private equity investment consultant review. Is there anyone who would like to pull either of those items? Okay, I just want to thank our Vice Chair, Investment Committee Vice Chair, Harry, and Jennifer for representing the board and the committee to do those interviews. So thank you very much for your time doing that. So without objection, those items are approved. Moving on to the next two agenda items 5 and 6, which are also on the consent agenda, information only. I think I would just note that we typically would take some time to review the Green Team report, but you might recall that I think it was last year, we shifted to sort of having interim reports between reporting cycles. So this is an interim update that's been posted to the web that hopefully everyone's had a chance to look at. But when we have sort of the fuller report, again, in upcoming years, we of course would take the time to review that in more detail. Does anyone want to pull any of these items? No? Okay, great. So now we'll move to agenda item number 7, which is an action item. It's a second reading of our revisions to our RMS policy. So I think we have Stephen joining us. Good morning, Stephen.
Good morning, Madam Chair, and thank you for this time. And good morning to the rest of the investment committee. So my name is Stephen Tong. I'm the Director of Risk Mitigating Strategies. Also on the line, I have Carrie Lowe, who's a portfolio manager for the trend and systematic portion of the RMS portfolio. And she will be available for any questions and answers. Again, this is the second reading of the Risk Mitigating Strategies policy revisions. And if you can flip to the next page on the presentation, please. So on this page here, you'll see 4 policy proposals that were brought forward in the first reading in March. And what staff is recommending today is approval of 2 of the changes, which I'll go into a little details in a bit. Overall, the way I kind of think about these policy changes is really from 2 perspectives. One is to increase the portfolio effectiveness. And secondly, is to provide the flexibility in managing the program. So the first proposal, and that's number 1, is to reduce the U.S. Treasury components from the current strategic weight of 40% to 35%, and then to increase the global macro from its current strategic weight of 10% to 15%. The thought behind this proposal is that given the current rising interest rate environment and where rates are currently for the U.S. Treasuries 20-year plus, we're concerned a little about the efficacy of this portion, and hence we're recommending a reduction to the exposure. However, I want to state that the U.S. Treasury, we feel, is an important component of the program, and combined with the trend following, which remains at 45%, the 2 strategies are about 80% of the portfolio. The thought is that U.S. Treasuries are really kind of first responder, and trend is the next layer of protection. The second proposal that we're recommending the committee approve is the 4th proposal, and that's to retain a dynamic benchmark for total portfolio. The reason sort of behind this, we feel that it will provide maximum flexibility in terms of rebalancing the portfolio strategies. So I want to go on to next and talk about the 2 remaining policies, which we're asking the board not to approve. So this first one is the second proposal, and that's to reduce the range around the strategies from 10% to 5%. Following the March meeting, we had some discussions with senior management and also with Makita. And what we thought was that this area really requires maybe further discussions and thinking about what is the role of the RMS portfolio, and will we be better served if we left it at the current range of 10%. And so we feel that at this time, it's appropriate to to leave at the 10%, and this will maximize the flexibility in terms of managing the program, especially around the crisis. That an example was when we went back to the first quarter of 2020. And then the last proposal has to do with, at the last minute, we introduced sort of a benchmark within the global macro portion. As you're aware, the global macro portion is really broken down into two strategies. One is systematic and one is discretionary. And we have exposures to both. There was a proposal to modify the policy to include a benchmark for the systematic portion of the global macro. What we're recommending is that no changes occur pending our review of the benchmark for the RMS portfolio. So with that, we're open to any questions and answers.
Thank you, Stephen. Let's see, I don't have any questions in the queue right now. I think the one comment that I would make is, we had discussion on this back in March. And I think in the item, there also is a memo from Makita providing their review of the policy proposal. I do have a question now. Gail, looks like you have a question. I'll turn it to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to thank the team and especially Ms. Urton, because I think the changes in this policy are actually really solid and really reflected. I do think Makita had one interesting question, just how the allocations, like how this long-term strategic allocation will change the way the portfolio performs in different market regimes. So like when we have a downturn, I think it's, and will the way you've changed it potentially have higher returns? Obviously, this is such a great example of the way we mitigate downturns, but I just think it would be helpful for all of us to understand kind of how these changes actually may lead to a different type of return when there's any type of correction in the market. Mr. Tong, if you don't mind just sort of speaking to that generally, I think would be helpful for all of us to understand. But again, great job, and I'm happy to move it when appropriate, Madam Chair.
Sure, happy to respond, and thank you for the question. When we think about the U.S. Treasury component of the portfolio, when we first added it to the program, rates were at a much higher level than where they currently are today. So what we sort of witnessed over time is that even before the pandemic, that rates have been moving downwards, which, as you're aware, is that when rates move down, the value of the exposure moves up. And so what we witnessed in the first quarter of 2020, at the onset of the pandemic, indeed, the U.S. Treasury component, which we talked about earlier as a first responder, did respond accordingly. And then if an equity drawdown persists, what we expect then is really the trend following component to really kind of kick in. One of the, as we design the portfolio, one of the things that we always kind of think about is that what would a crisis look like? And as we go back in history and we look at various equity crises, there's no one factor, there's no one thing that really drives it. It's really multi-factors and many different scenarios. So the idea is that when we built this program, what we wanted to do was to structure it in a manner that we have as many strategies as possible so that we can deal with the crisis. One of the things that we talked about previously is that we feel, and I stated earlier, is that the Treasury component still remains an important component, but because where rates are currently right now, we thought it's prudent to really reduce it. What we've done too is that, and we brought forward information in the March agenda, is that when we look at global macro and through various increasing rate environments, for the most part, global macro is the best performing strategy. And through the course of a drawdown, it does provide the diversification that really matters, maybe not to the degree of the U.S. Treasury components. We are going to be spending our time over the course of the next year looking for other strategies that will, which will potentially help improve the program overall.
Thank you, Gail. So I have a question from, well, actually, hold on. I see both Steve and Scott popped on. Is there any additional comment you need to make on that? Okay, thank you. We have a question from Betty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. And I'm prepared to second Ms. Miller's motion when we're ready. But thank you for the terrific work on this. I wanted to get a sense of what to expect going forward, because I know, and I appreciated Nikita's memo with respect to the challenges of global macro with respect to benchmarking. And so I wanted to get a sense of kind of Nikita's kind of more full-blown review of benchmarks and how that will tie to the timing of our normal asset allocation process, which is where I think further changes to global macro will be considered in the future.
So, Steve, from Nikita, would you like to comment?
Yeah, happy to. The holistic review of benchmarks from our perspective is a planned part of next fiscal year's work that we'll be doing. And it will be before the next asset liability review. I don't know offhand exactly when the next one is scheduled for. But the point of that benchmark review, to kind of tie it to this RMS policy change, is to make sure that the committee and staff and everyone is viewing benchmarks as part of the whole portfolio and not just at sort of an asset class specific level. So this is perhaps the most interesting asset class because it has goals and objectives that are not just return-based, they're risk mitigation-based as well. And so we'll be diving into that over the next several months.
And Betty, if I can just add, one of the things that we've actually asked Chris and Scott to do at our July meeting, because we anticipate that we'll have additional policy revisions proposed there, is to also just briefly provide the committee with kind of an overall context for these policy revisions. Some of them, as you know, are potentially related to opportunities we're pursuing in the collaborative model. Some are related to some ongoing discussions that we've had about risk budgeting. Others are just taken into account, either different opportunities in the market, modifications that we need to make, conforming policies to a consistent standard. So I think I'm hoping that being able to give all of us that context will help us see at a high level how it fits together, instead of feeling like we have these things coming one by one, and and also then making sure that we can step back and think about how it affects us holistically on things like benchmarking, both for performance measurement as well as whatever any related compensation impacts might be. So we can take a look at that. So I think there'll be more to come in terms of specific timing on how we'll have those brought before the board. But that is something we're really focused on for the next few months.
Great, thank you very much for that, Madam Chair. It does feel like I think these are really important policy discussions to have, and I think you've touched on my concern, and that is how do we look at this more holistically and with respect to the total fund. So I'm pleased to hear about that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay. So there aren't any other questions. Gail, you had earlier mentioned that you may want to move this item.
Yes, please. May I move approval of the item, please?
I will second that motion.
Great. Okay, so moved by Gail and seconded by Betty. So Steve, I think we need a roll call vote, please.
Okay, Ms. Bradford?
Yes.
Ms. Hendricks?
Yes.
Mr. Keeley?
Yes.
Mr. Berzon?
Yes.
Ms. Erden?
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Yamamoto,
Aye.
Ms. Miller,
Aye.
Mr. Seha,
Aye.
Mr. Yamanaka,
Aye.
Controller Yi,
Aye.
and Madam Chair, do you care to vote?
Yes, I'll vote yes, please.
Okay, the motion passes.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone. Thank you, Steve, for presenting, and and also just listening and taking in some of the comments and discussion that we had in March. And my thanks also to Jennifer, because I think some of the comments that you made helped us refine how we move forward with this. So thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So I'm gonna have to hit pause for just a moment because I overlooked that there was somebody who actually had a public comment on item number 6, which was one of our consent agenda items. So Mike, we're gonna just take a 3 minutes to take that public comment, and then we'll come to you. Okay, so Samantha, thank you.
Okay, our caller is Jane. Jane, go
On
ahead.
behalf of Fossil Free, on behalf of Fossil Free California, I made our first request for CalSTRS to divest from fossil fuels 7 years ago this month, and we are truly sorry that CalSTRS missed the deadline. As the Corporate Knights report indicates, and as the CTA callers Ed Foglia and Kevin seem totally unaware, the funds would have earned billions more in profit had it divested by 2019. But the financial advantages of divestment are not our only regret. Like your previous Green Initiative Task Force reports, this interim report continues to highlight the progress made by shareholder engagement. Your success stories, as well as Engine One's seating of 3 new oil executives on the Exxon board, include commitments from 3 utility companies to obtain net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Why is Fossil Free California not popping champagne corks in celebration? In a nutshell, we are rapidly running out of time. According to the United Nations, to prevent unstoppable, irreversible, catastrophic climate disasters that will increase exponentially in their frequency and ferocity, global carbon emissions will have to be reduced by 50% in the next 9 years. That is by 2030. Let me say that again, for it is truly mind-boggling. To prevent unstoppable, irreversible, catastrophic climate disasters that will increase exponentially in their frequency and ferocity, global carbon emissions will have to be reduced by 50% in the next 9 years. Failing to meet this goal will make all commitments of net zero emissions by 2050 obsolete. We will have caused tipping point after tipping point to become unleashed, affecting unimaginable suffering throughout the world. Whether this emissions reduction goal is still attainable is unclear. But if it is to succeed, it will be because governments and financial institutions like CalSTRS will treat the crisis as the dire emergency that it is, the likes of which humanity has never seen before. I ask each one of you on the CalSTRS board to consider the findings of this Green Initiative report and evaluate honestly whether you believe the results of CalSTRS' years of engagement with fossil fuel companies has and is making them change their business model with the urgency required. Do you honestly believe that engagement ad infinitum without divestment action will force them to reduce their carbon emissions by 50% in the next 9 years? Anything less will be futile. Members of the Investment Committee, we urge you to treat the climate crisis as the emergency it is. Instead of perpetuating the crisis by investing in the continued burning of fossil fuels, divest the teachers' hard-earned money from the industry that threatens civilization itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments.
Okay, thanks.
Caller in the queue.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. Okay, so now we'll shift to agenda item 8A and 8B, which are 2 investment policy revisions. We'll start with real estate, and then we have global equity. Just a time check, we have 45 minutes allotted for presentation and discussion on these 2 items. So I think we're starting with real estate. Mike.
Hi, good morning. Mike DeRay, Director of Real Estate. I have with me presenting today is Greg Arndt, recently promoted to Associate Portfolio Manager. And one of the 4 people who did a lot of work on this item inclusive is Chris Preston and Mike. Greg and I will be doing the comments. So next slide, please. So the reason we bring the real estate policy forward is the most significant number of changes are in the policy format. We haven't changed the format like the other, like most of the other units have done. And so there's significant changes to our policy to meet the format. And in that, we also are streamlining the policy and moving a lot of the more detailed issues into our guidelines like other units have done prior to us. The most significant changes from a standpoint of changing the policy from an investment standpoint center around leverage and flexibility with the collaborative model. And I just want to touch on a couple of reasons, big picture reasons of why we're doing this. The market, as we've discussed, is moving a lot faster. And we have shorter timeframes to make decisions in order to compete in the marketplace. And there's a lot larger transactions. And CalSTRS has grown with it, both in sophistication and the size of our portfolio. With respect to leverage, it's been discussed quite often that this low leverage rate environment has affected all asset classes. With respect to real estate, it also creates an opportunity because very low leverage rates are available on across the portfolio, but predominantly in core assets. And since we have control of the leverage decision, we're looking for some flexibility in applying those low rates of leverage to our core properties, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So with that, I will turn it over to Greg Arndt, who will discuss the leverage issue. Greg?
Good morning. Thank you, Mike. I'd like to at least speak to the first item that you brought up regarding key changes in that real estate policy, which is leverage. And what we're attempting to do is align our leverage decisions with the collaborative model, which we use oftentimes interchangeably with control. What we're proposing is a 50% loan to value maximum for the control portfolio. And this, in essence, is basically made up of our separate accounts and joint ventures and includes assets amongst that risk spectrum, whether they be core, value add, or opportunistic. In these cases, with this control portfolio, we typically control the major decisions. We're oftentimes 80%, 90%, or 95% of the capital going into these investments. And with that, we've negotiated to have control over major decisions, which include leverage. We're proposing also a 65% loan to value maximum for what would fall outside of that, which would be the non-control portfolio. And traditionally, these are made up of funds. Oftentimes with these funds, we have an advisory board seat, and we do have some say in terms of what major decisions are made, but not complete control of major decisions. And oftentimes, items like leverage are dictated before the fund actually begins. Let me give you one example, as I spend most of my time in the industrial and logistics space. What we do in that process on our build to core or transitional core portfolio is that we purchase land, spend the next year or two planning and developing and building those assets, and then transition that asset to core after we have it leased out, we've stabilized the cash flows. With our current policy, we have different limits and guidelines at each one of those stages. So while it's in an opportunistic stage, while it's land, or while it's being built, we have a leverage guideline or limitation. And in the marketplace nowadays, where we have some items, some asset types like industrial that's being highly valued and is seen as low risk, lenders are providing an increase in loan to value and also very low rates due to their expectation of the lack of risk within those assets. So on the next 2 slides, I'd like to point out where our policy is and where our current leverage levels are. So as of the end of last year, within our policy, our core portfolio, and the way we've broken this out, is by core, value add, and opportunistic. Our core policy is at a 40% overall loan to value ratio. Our value add policy is at a 65% maximum, and opportunistic does not have a maximum level. As you can see, based on those blue bars, we've maintained discipline and kept our leverage below those in each of the categories, leading to a total of 37.9% of overall leverage in our portfolio. If you reclassify those buckets from core, value add, and opportunistic, into this control or collaborative and non-control segments, as shown on the next slide, you'll see the way that that is broken out. So the total portfolio leverage has remained the same, 37.9%. But the control portfolio has slightly increased because we've added in some of those assets in which we have control over leverage decisions, but are either at a value add or an opportunistic stage. And the non-control remains fairly the same. What we're saying is by increasing the leverage from a purely core portfolio, you're now bumping up closer to that 40% pure core leverage level. And while we're adding in a few of these, probably about 20 to 25% of the overall portfolio is made up of the value add and opportunistic assets. We're bumping up closer to that 40% level. So we're asking to move to a 50% loan to value ratio as a maximum, of which we hope to maintain discipline like we have in the past to keep it well below. But that allows us some flexibility in the placement of our debt amongst those different stages of development or amongst different risk segmentations when the market provides attractive opportunities. So in summary, hopefully this adds this would add some flexibility to our decision-making process. It would provide us with the ability to place leverage where it's most accretive. The change will also allow, we believe, for better transparency and oversight from the board and the board consultant into our collaborative investments. And I'll now turn over to Mike, the proposed discretionary changes in authority.
Thanks, Greg. So the changes, there was some language changes as well, some obsolete language in the in previous policy, and so we removed that. But the biggest change is we are asking for more discretion for a new manager allocation. The bulk of the large transactions we do, we have historically done, the vast majority is with our existing managers that we've created long-term relationships with. But occasionally a manager will come along in a strategy that we want to grow. And we may want to buy into their existing portfolio. And so what this does is allows us, this change will allow us to be, cast a wider net for new managers in most likely new strategies or strategies that we want to grow. So the table at the bottom just kind of shows the change from a numbers standpoint. Currently, the portfolio size in real estate is roughly 37 billion of net asset value. And the current policy says we can have 2%. We can go out and seek out a manager to buy assets or to give allocation up to 740 million. And we're asking that to change to 3%, which will allow us to seek out transactions and or new manager relationships at 3%, which given that current 37 billion would be $1.1 billion. And those are the biggest changes. Happy to talk about some of the more significant, numerous changes that were in the policy and why we move things around and or questions about these two issues. And so I'll open it up to any questions. Also, RFA, your board consultant, is available to answer questions as well. They did review the policy and their letter is attached to the item.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, I did. And I think I see you have to kind of scroll through the gallery at the top, but I know that we've got several members from the RFA team here with us, and their memo is attached to the item. So let's go to questions. Let's see. First, I've got Harry, and then Bill, and Jennifer, and Betty. Harry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thanks for the presentation, Mike, and member of your team there, Greg. Supportive of the proposed changes. Do have a question around that last slide of going from 2% to 3%, from 740 million to 1.1 billion. Mike, can you talk a little bit about how assets under management in real estate will grow so that that 1.1 number we can assume will simply grow over time if the portfolio performs as we expect it to? Any thoughts in terms of how we should be thinking about oversight from that role? Maybe Ben and Taylor can provide some insights as well. I'm supportive of it, but I want to just know how you're thinking about that.
Okay. I'll address the size. If we were at our full allocation of 15%, then the real estate portfolio would be sized at around 45 billion if we were to reach full allocation. And then that would allow us to move to, quick math, $1.35 billion. So just assuming no change in the size of the fund, that would move with us moving the real estate allocation larger. And if we were to tomorrow magically get to 15% of the allocation, that would move from its current roughly $1.1 billion to $1.35 billion. And the reason we use percentages is just for that reason, that it should be relative to the size. The risk, we believe, is relative to the size of the portfolio. And you can see if as the portfolio grows, the dollar amount does not move that significantly from 1.1 to 1.35. And again, I would point out most of the large real estate transactions, in fact, all of the ones I can think of in my 20 years here, has been buying assets. And when we're buying assets, we're not taking a significant risk like a blind pool allocation. So that's the reason for the flexibility is we're seeing the time frame of deals and don't necessarily want to make sure that if we can move on these transactions, that we have the flexibility to do so and the timeframes are allowed, given our board meetings are roughly every two months.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I had the math down. I just wanted to know, do you and the team, and of course from our folks from RFA, believe that as that grows and your ability to move more quickly, the opportunities will increase for us without increasing risks?
I don't know that discretion being known in the marketplace will increase the opportunities. The opportunities are increasing significantly just due to our activity in the marketplace, and has been growing over time. But I don't know that just this announcement will in any way increase the number of opportunities, but it could.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Harry. Before I go to Bill, I just want to invite, I don't know if Taylor, Ben, or Chris, any additional comment you have on Harry's question? Didn't look like it. Okay. So Ben, are you going to say something?
I was going to say I don't have anything to add. So
okay, got it. Thank you. Okay, sorry about that, Bill.
Mike and team, again, congratulations on great performance. We look forward to more of it. And I, like Harry, embrace and endorse this policy change. The question, I'm curious, when we are in a non-control position in a portfolio, when we go into a fund, what kind of negotiating leverage do we have on the terms, for example, with respect to loan to value and other terms, given our size and activity in the marketplace?
Well, by the way, I think this would be similar if you asked the question to the private equity group. It really depends on, in these closed-end funds, the amount that we commit to the strategy. If we're a significant partner, we have some sway in that, and we've actually negotiated down leverage levels, usually by around 5% margins, getting them from 70 to 65 or 65 to 60. So we have been effective in lowering the funds that we get into leverage ratios to make sure that we're paying the partners not for financial engineering, but for their real estate skills. And I think that's important for us to continue to try to do that. But we can't, in these closed-end funds, I wouldn't want to give the board the impression we have a significant amount of power unless we come in for like 20 or 30% of the allocation, which happens occasionally with the newer funds. We can have more influence. But normally there is the industry itself has been pushing back for the same reasons we are. And we're finding a lot of these strategies have significantly lower leverage to start with, and we're pleased about that.
Thanks.
Jennifer.
Thank you, Joy. And thank you all. I add my support as well, and also the echo the kind words. My question was largely answered actually just with Bill's question, though. I might just ask, I do have some concern with leverage levels overall, generally, particularly in this environment, and recognizing long-lived assets. So In the reporting that comes back to us, I would just request that as we get those reports on leverage levels, that they're shown to us in a way where we can interpret, the level of comfort, versus any flags that we might want to make sure that we keep our eye on. And similarly, as you're underwriting new opportunities, particularly in the non-control situations where we don't, have as much influence. So I really applaud the influence that we do have and how you use it. But to see that the margin of safety and the investment style and in a competitive environment, knowing when they're willing to walk away is, I know it's part of our decision, and I'm comforted by that fact. Thank you.
Great. And thanks, Jennifer. We can, what we could do is put some of those risk or leverage aspects into the CIO report going forward. So we can connect a little bit on that offline.
Great. Thank you.
And just very quickly, we'll do the same on the consulting side in the semi-annual reports.
Great. Thank you for making that connection too. Good. Okay. Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you, Scott, for popping on to address that. Let's see, Betty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to tack on to Jennifer's suggestion, maybe a little bit broader discussion about the impact of rising interest rates on the use of leverage, and just that's the environment that I think we're all kind of concerned about. I had a question regarding the environmental liability language, and I think I know the answer to this in terms of hopefully providing more flexibility, but it seems like the current language was stronger, and the proposed language much truncated, but it also seems like it's preserving some flexibility for us as well. But could you just comment on the thought behind the changes to that particular section?
Sure. We did work with the SIS group in trying to make sure that our language was consistent with other asset classes. And it is, I would say it's more broad, and but we are, we'll move things as we move things in the guidelines. And I honestly, I don't remember what's in the guidelines right now with respect to environmental liability issues, but significant. And so there will be additional, there is and will continue to be additional environmental guidelines. We stay within the same framework that we were in previously.
Okay. I mean, I think for us, a matter of policy, the tenor of the change seems more like policy language. It's less prescriptive than what it had been. So then I think what you're alluding to, Mike, is that then in terms of how we actualize this will be kind of the more specific strategies.
That's correct.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Just one comment or maybe question that I have is in reviewing the RFA memo, it sort of recognizes that some of the that there are now some elements in the real estate guidelines that may need to be updated, or Mike, even in the context of the question that you just responded to for Betty, I think we have our policy and we have the guidelines. I don't think that the guidelines come to the board or come to the committee for approval, but is there a mechanism for, escalating or identifying issues that might be changed in the guidelines so that there is, or what's the right mechanism for appropriate oversight of that?
Yeah, so what we'll be doing with the guidelines is as we change the guidelines and update them, they will be reviewed by RFA as we go through them. So they will have full visibility of the guidelines, and as they have in the past. It is, if we're happy to add language in the policy that's being done, and that's part of our guideline update. We're remiss in adding that after seeing RFA's comments, but we're happy to add that.
And just if I could just make an additional comment to Mike's, in the process in the background is Mike, and we'll work with the consultants to make any necessary guideline changes. That will then be reviewed by our compliance team so that we'll develop the processes to make sure we comply from that. That's then reviewed by Chris, April, and myself to sign off on that as well. So that's just want you to know that there's a process behind this.
Okay.
And I'll just simply note that we are comfortable with that process. We're also comfortable with the concept that the policy focus on more high-level, impactful, strategic items with tactical matters and those that might change with greater frequency being put in the real estate guidelines. So we'll be closely monitoring that process as it continues.
Okay, that's helpful, and I recognize the value in doing it that way because there are many externalities that may affect us, changes in laws, et cetera. We don't necessarily want to have to bring policies back for revision to the committee every single time. So I think as long as we're comfortable with the level of oversight, including by our consultants, that seems feasible. Betty might have an additional question. Betty?
I think in that vein, just kind of on the heels of some of the public comment we heard this morning, but the current language on regarding the prohibition on investments that capitalize on displacing low-income tenants, applies only to where in cases where CalSTRS has a controlling interest. And I was wondering if we needed to clarify that more going forward. I don't know if people are reading it that it may seem ambiguous for someone who's not kind of been working in this area.
The reason it is with respect to where we have a controlling interest is because that on strategies, let's say with affordable housing,
yeah.
If we had a controlling interest, therefore we'd have control of the strategy.
Oh no, I'm not questioning. No. It's just whether the language of the policy needs to be more clear going forward. That it's only for situations where we have a controlling interest. I mean, we know that, but I'm just cognizant of some of the public comment that we get or our perceptions about CalSTRS interest in various holdings.
So maybe Mike, if we can have you work with Chris and Scott and maybe legal counsel to take a look at that. Betty, is that okay with you if we take a look at it and we'll make sure to come back and notify the committee on any recommended change or how it.
That's fine. I don't want to delay this, but I'm sensitive to just some of the public comment we've received and kind of a lack of understanding about what CalSTRS holdings really mean.
Right. Okay. No, thank you. That's a good catch for us to take a look at. Okay, there are no more questions in the queue right now. This was a first reading information item, unless, but the board is permitted to take action today if there is interest in doing so. Otherwise, I think it should come back to us in July as a second reading and for action. Okay, all right. Thanks very much, Mike and Greg. Thank you for presenting as well. Thank you, and thanks to RFA. The other policy revision that we have scheduled is item 8B, which is our global equity policy revision. So good morning, June. Good to see you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Investment Committee. Thank you. I'm June Kim, the Director of Global Equity. This morning, I'm joined by Portfolio Manager David Murphy, who will take us through this presentation. David?
Thanks, June. Good morning, everybody. I'm David Murphy, a portfolio manager in global equity, and today we're proposing 2 revisions to the global equity policy. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Our first recommended revision is to simplify our blended global equity policy benchmark by consolidating to one equity index. And we call it the MSCI All Country World Investable Market Index. I know that's a mouthful, but that's the reason why we call it ACWI IMI, for simplicity's sake. Our second, and we're going to discuss that in more detail on the next slide. Our second recommendation is to update the policy to more accurately reflect how transition management is actually done within global equity. The current policy's language implies that we only use transition management for defunding or liquidating managers. But we also use transition management for other portfolio needs, such as raising cash for benefit payments and rebalancing our portfolio allocations to adjust our exposures and risk characteristics. So I'm going to pause there before I go to the next slide to see if there are any questions. All right. Next slide, please. Thank you. Let's spend some time reviewing the policy benchmark recommendation. So I think to help frame our discussion, it's important to provide a brief history of global equity. So when I started CalSTRS in 2006, the current structure of global equity didn't even exist. In fact, US and non-US equity were separate asset classes, each with their own unique benchmark. So for the US portfolio, it was the Russell 3000. And then for the non-US portfolio, it was ACWI ex-US. And it wasn't until 2009 that these individual asset classes were combined to form a single global equity asset class. And our policy benchmark was simply created by combining a fixed 67% weight to Russell 3000 and a 33% weight to ACWI ex-US. Next slide, please. So the next modification to our policy benchmark occurred as a result of the 2015 asset liability study. We kept the US and non-US benchmarks the same, but we changed their weights. So we shifted away from having this static US home country bias to dynamic global index weights as defined by MSCI. So the Russell 3, and on the right side, just to explain how we weighted our benchmark, the Russell 3000 weight is actually the weight of the US market within ACWI IMI. And we did the same thing for the non-US benchmark. Next slide, please. So with the board's approval, we'd like to move forward to the next phase of our policy benchmark evolution and adopt the MSCI ACWI IMI. We believe that using a single global equity benchmark better reflects the goal to target and manage active risk across the entire portfolio. And additionally, this benchmark was approved for CIS at the July 2020 Investment Committee meeting. And if our policy revisions are approved, all public equity assets would be measured against the same benchmark. So that is it, and we'll be happy to address any questions from the committee.
Thanks very much, David, and thank you, June. I see Stephen has joined us, Steve McCourt, and we also do have a memo from Makita outlining their overview of the proposed policy change in the item. Are there any? There aren't any questions yet. There's maybe one question I have, and it actually has to do with the recommendation or just the note in the Makita memo about compensation policy impact. I think as we talked about a little bit earlier, taking a look at benchmarks holistically, as well as trying to understand and take action on any comp impact is something that I think is a priority for the committee and for the board in the next fiscal year. We need to work out timing on doing that. But I think, Steve, I just want to confirm, Makita's view is that even if we know that's something that we will take up hopefully soon in the fiscal year, that if there's a modest lag in doing that, you're comfortable, you would be comfortable with moving forward with the policy change.
We would be, yes.
Okay, great. So there are no questions, June and David, which is usually a really good sign because it means that everything that you presented was clear and understandable. So this again is a first reading of the policy. The board can take action here if it likes to. Otherwise, what we'll be doing is we'll bring it back as a second reading and anticipate taking action at our July meeting. Okay, thanks, June. Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me just check before we move on whether there are if there's anyone in the public comment line for public comment on this item.
There are no callers in the queue.
Okay. Sharon, I see your hand raised. I'm sorry.
Yeah, if I can just interject, because I think you and I have talked offline about this, but I guess I would just ask if on the comp issue and some of these policy changes moving forward, and I assume, Chris, your team is working with, Brian and our legal staff to ensure that we're kind of catching as we're looking at these policies, catching any pieces that will impact compensation so that when we have these conversations throughout this next year on the regular board side, that we can kind of make sure that the communication is clear in terms of implications, no unintended consequences, that kind of stuff.
Chris?
Thanks, Troy. Sharon, any of these changes that the investment committee approves then goes to the CEO. You've delegated all the appendixes, if you remember those in the comp policy, where every asset class had their own individual benchmark and measure. Those are delegated to the CEO. So when you change it at the investment committee, we bring them all as a package to Jack or Cassandra. And once those are approved, then they're effective for that year.
And I think one note that I would add, though, is that, I think that there are some policy changes, Chris, that we might make that then move through the process the way you just described. But it seemed like there also the comp policy impact that Makita recommended wasn't necessarily a result of a policy change, but is something that needs to be reviewed because of the policy change. So I think we just need to make sure that we also understand how to manage some of those other items that we need to consider, even if it's not even if it's delegated to the CEO. I think we just want to sort of follow through and make sure that we understand how any of these items are implemented. Mm-hmm. Okay.
We will. And make
Great.
sure it's a follow-on. Yep.
Okay. Great. I see Brian popping up. Oh, I thought I saw Brian.
I was there. I heard my name mentioned, and just wanted you to know that I work with Christmas staff to support them in Melissa Norcia and her staff work really closely and track all this as well.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. Item number 9 is our CIO report. Hi, Chris.
Hi, thank you for the clarification. So I'll go through this pretty quickly. Thank you, Jonathan, if you can turn the slides. So, hey, for the public, I want to be clear, the assets were 299 back in April, but we broke 300 as of May. And then here so far in June, we're actually at 307. So we have broken 300 million, second U.S. pension plan to do that. Pretty remarkable. And I'll go through some of the numbers on this year. I guess the theme, if I had one, I'm going to take you back to your statistics classes. You remember a standard deviation is supposed to measure 2/3 of the potential outcomes, measuring a year, measuring life, whatever. 2 standard deviations measures 95% of the potential outcomes. The pandemic obviously puts it in perspective. I mean, that is a 3 or a 4 standard deviation event in life. This equity market, not just in the US, but around the world, is a 2 standard deviation event. It is beyond our normal range of expectations and just truly remarkable. So some of the numbers I'm going to run through, I'll just say it, are mind-blowing without question. Next page. So here's the asset allocation. It actually is very steady, which is amazing because while equities have gone up a lot and fixed income has and interest rates have gone down, some of the other asset classes have held their value. They can't grow as fast as global equity has. This fund, our fund, is up $60 billion, $60 billion just in the last 11 months. So truly remarkable. Next page. Here's the risk, and we're going to start showing these more frequently. So here's the risk of the global equity portfolio within their risk budget range. Even though the market's getting more volatile, this adjusts. And right now, we're bullish, but we're not super aggressive in what we're doing because this market just is so strong. We're just riding with it, but not trying to get ahead of it. Next page. The team added this, the risk team of Geraldine and Josh wanted to add this slide because there's a lot of talk in the financial press about the future of inflation. And anytime you have this level of government spending, not just in the US, but around the entire world, you typically see inflation. And for those that were on the board after 2008, when the Federal Reserve pumped a lot of stimulus into the economy, we expected inflation after 2008, but we didn't get it. Now everybody's talking about it because we're certainly seeing inflation in building products, everything from cement, plaster, paint, wood. People were talking yesterday about, the lack of automobiles and chips shortages. So prices have risen across the board, but is this temporary or permanent? This goes all the way back to 1983. And I think it's particularly poignant because right now, people like me, the more senior members of society are in the baby boom. Jack obviously was the beginning edge where he went to Woodstock, as we'll talk about tomorrow. But when you look at that, we were growing up and going to college in 83 through the 90s, and inflation was spiking in 1991, 89, as high as 6%. So you got a whole generation that's used to seeing inflation and has been expecting it to come back. But then look at the forward moving years. Inflation just kept dropping and dropping. And while it's very volatile, we certainly have gone through regimes where inflation now is below 2%, very, very low for the last decade. So going forward, Blackstone did a mapping of a whole bunch of investment firms' expectations, and they come out with this forecast of 2.6% now and going forward. You can see there's a pretty wide band as you go out longer of expectations of inflation up to 4 or down to 2. We care about inflation a great deal because that really is the true enemy of our retirees. Once you retire on a fixed income, inflation's the one thing that can really harm your cost of living or your lifestyle and your living ability. So we think it's going to be low. It should stay low. And if you remember, that's the very first input we use in the asset allocation model. You were talking about it earlier. The next ALM study would start in 2003. Usually we go first and then the actuaries follow us. I'd love to push the actuaries to go first this time because I think setting that inflation expectation is going to be really, really important. That will set the base of where the investment assumptions go and what the contribution rates are in the future.
If you said 2003, you mean 2023, right?
I think I slipped 2023. We can't go back in time. Yes, 2023.
Okay,
somewhere in there we'll start it. We do it every 4 years in line with the actuaries. Thanks, Joy.
Yep.
Next page, Jonathan. So looking out of the horizon, I crossed out inflation is in check because so far it's not, but it's not necessarily a problem. Obviously, the mutations of the virus, California is going to open up on the 15th. A lot of things are changing, masks, no masks, but we'll see really that's going to be the key to the summer is what are the mutations and are we protected from them or not? Next page. I added, Gail, income inequality, as you had asked before, to this list. Obviously, the pandemic is number one. I highlighted we've had internet disruptions and cyber attacks on there for a while. Now, sadly, they're back in the news. I have highlighted the North Korea aggression. It pops up in the news periodically, but that certainly is a big challenge. And then obviously, China and Russia, not aggression, but just our relationship with them. I was participating in a group call where they basically said that we're not going to have a Cold War with China. We're going to have a cold peace. Relations with China are not good. They are very cold. China wants to be operating, obviously, in its own world and left alone. But Taiwan, there are numerous issues that are going to be sensitive in the coming year or so. Again, always something we have to continue to watch. And then, I have earthquakes on there all the time. A strange swarm of earthquakes in Southern California. Thankfully, no significant damage. But if you talk to the California Earthquake Authority, I think they said that the likelihood of a big earthquake in California was somewhere around 99% in the next 50 years. How they predict that, I'm not sure, but I'll go with their predictions. So next page, I think, is the end of the report. A couple things I want to highlight, and you can take that off the screen, Jonathan. I do want to highlight the Green Team report. I know there was a public comment about it. We list in there our strategies as it relates to climate change and climate change solution investments. We also talk about physical risk and how we're measuring that. And then we use that as a way to monitor some of the government's activities. Everything is going to focus in on COP26 in Glasgow this coming fall. And we are participating in numerous asset owner groups that are putting in Prince Charles and numerous groups that are putting in comments and feedback to really push what we're pledging to do to help solve climate change and what we think companies need to do to help solve climate change. Our investment view, just to share with you the house view on the market, and you'll hear it in our tactical asset allocation discussion. We're slightly bullish. So it's a flavor of beyond neutral. We're not just neutral, we're slightly bullish. We are overweight a little bit equity, but we continue to take profits when the equity market runs like this. We're neutral in terms of real assets and inflation. And we're slightly underweight the diversifying assets of RMS and fixed income, but we're mostly because of the decline in interest rates and fixed income. We are shifting money into RMS to aim for its long-term target of 10%. And then cash, we have been modeling cash and have plenty of cash on hand for the next 9 months to a year. Let me read you some of the numbers. So this is as of May 31. These are returns for the last year of the different indexes in the market, just 1 year. So May 31 to June 1 to May 31. The Russell 3000 up 44%. 44%. Shocking. Russell 2000 value. So these are stocks that are deemed to be more safe than the typical stock. 79.4%. Off the scale. Ridiculous. The developed world up 56%. Emerging markets up 53%. 53. So just shocking. As I said, 2 standard deviations. The average return over that time period, normally, from 1926 to the year 2020, most of these would have averaged about 12%. Yet you're up 43%. Obviously, last June was still part of the low and the rebound, but even in 2021, so let's just look at the first 5 months of this calendar year, US stocks are up 12%. That's more than what we expect in an entire year. The emerging markets are up 8%, and the developed markets are up 14%. So truly remarkable returns. Now, longer term, a lot of you are going to say, okay, Chris, that's great. What about next year? What about next fiscal year? We're up so well this fiscal year. There are a lot of interesting statistics, but typically when you have a booming year like this, it's not followed by a crash. It is usually followed, the good times carry on. It's usually followed by a positive market, but a much more modest positive market. So typically when we see a boom year, and this goes back to 1933, the 1950s, the 1980s and 90s, when you had these kinds of huge returns, the next year is usually a high single digit or a low double digit, like 8 to 12%. I don't know if we're going to really get that. Obviously, Washington, D.C. is dealing with a ton of tax issues, changes in corporate tax, personal tax, stimulus plans. All of those things could have a powerful impact. But I think the most powerful impact is going to be the issue of returning to the office. Clearly, everybody is looking to the September 7th, the day after Labor Day. I don't know if we're going to have a huge rush hour traffic crunch that day or what, but as people go back to the office, it's going to be interesting to see how that impacts the equity markets, how it impacts consumer spending. We just have a lot of aberrations going on in the economy right now, and then how that will impact the global equity markets. With that, I'll open it up to questions.
What questions are there for Chris? Maybe Chris, I'll just mention and get your thoughts on how to handle this. But I think it was the controller who made a comment, sort of a placeholder for potentially having a discussion or insight on how we look at leverage in the context of rising interest rates. I don't know if you have any initial feedback now, or if that's something that we may want to spend a little bit of put some time into your CEO report in July to discuss.
CIO report, just to remind you.
CIO.
I know, it's all about Jack right now, and I get it, and it should be. So I agree right on with Scott. So I changed, if you followed over the generations here that I've been doing the CIO report, I changed it from more of a market update report that I used to do to now it's a risk report, and I don't produce it. The credit goes to Geraldine and to Josh Diedish and the risk team. They're the ones that produce this report. It's going to focus in on portfolio risk and where the portfolio is positioned. So you've got the global equity risk budget. We're going to start putting the CIS risk budget and a fixed income risk budget. And I think if we put our heads together, as Scott said, we can figure out a way to do a real estate leverage report that's in there. It is provided to you twice a year in the, I still call it RCLCO, the RFA, semi-annual performance report. But I think we could easily break that out and show that to you as they divided it between control and non-control leverage. So you know right where that stands at a portfolio basis. And that would make the risk report pretty comprehensive with drill downs in each of the asset classes and those kind of simple charts. I see Geraldine jumped on, so. Think we can do that, Geraldine?
Yep, it's already duly noted, and Josh and I are having text messages as we speak on how to enhance the report. So thank you very much, Betty, for that recommendation. It's a great idea.
One other thing, and I think the question that Betty, if I'm not incorrect, is about our use of leverage as a total fund as well. That's something we've been studying for the last couple of years, leverage and liquidity. So we'll be happy to bring some of that forward. Let's collaborate in thinking what the right forum is. Chris and I will collaborate with Joy and Harry or Sharon on that, but we'd be happy because it's a big topic for us. And I think the first iteration really was in the crisis that we recently passed through, because we were using leverage in the form of derivatives to help us rebalance the portfolio. And that was just super timely in terms of, we could have timed it better. I think sometimes better be lucky than great, but a year in advance of the crisis, we had been thinking about how to manage through the next crisis, particularly from the perspective of being able to rebalance, because that's so important when equities are down, as an example, to sort of buy into that. So we can share some of those thoughts, but we've gone further from just management of crisis to thinking about, as an example, in real estate, can we take advantage of some of the low interest rates that we're seeing in the form of leverage, really depending on the underlying asset bases and the cash flows, right? So Mike talked about the controlled portfolio, which is mainly core real estate and the stable cash flows, and how to maximize or optimize the portfolio around leverage. So in any event, long story short is we've got lots to cover and would love to bring that forward.
Great, thank you. Didn't mean to add to your plate, but I think it will tell it'll give us the full context.
Yeah, well, we've been studying it for the last couple of years too, so I think it wouldn't be too difficult for us to.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Geraldine.
Okay, so I've got a question from Jennifer.
I might, and I'm sorry, I don't want to add to the list either by too much. So take this within the context of the lane that the board is in. But just to add to that, if we think of some of the exposures, we've also had currency exposure that's been a very strong dollar for a long time. So if we can just think about where we're exposed, so if we overlay that idea of not just what the facts are, but some judgment over where we have mismatches, either through refinancing of interest rates or not offset currency exposures, and where it's meaningful would be great across the portfolio. Thank you.
Yeah, we actually I get a monthly currency report as part of all of our monthly reporting. And keep in mind, our non-US dollar exposure is almost about 20 to 25% of the fund. It's concentrated in the big currencies, the pound, the euro, the yen. But we also have a handful of currency managers who are trying to play the key areas of where they think the best returns will be. And then we do manage over half of the currency exposure in-house with our own team, where we can protect the fund if it's a period of a strong dollar, and then let the currencies move if it's a period of a weak dollar. So something we've been managing actively for almost, 20 years, and can easily add that into the reports.
Thanks, Chris.
Great, thank you. Okay, no other questions here. Thanks, thank you, Chris. So let's see, item number 10 is a review of information requests. Steve, are you on? I've been taking notes, so maybe we can just kind of run through quickly what you have, and I'll add if there's anything that I caught that's not on your list.
Okay, great. Yeah, so obviously a lot of it was kind of just discussed. On item 8A had the request for reporting on leverage within the real estate portfolio and put in the CIO report. And I also had a request. Well, I think that's the main request I picked up. Did you have a few more?
Yeah, maybe just so there's the one on leverage. So both, I think Scott and Chris will come back maybe with a discussion item or presentation to the committee on that, incorporating it into the report. So we covered both of those. Jennifer just mentioned the request for us to think about taking a look at our reporting on currency exposures. That was a new one. We have the, I think that Mike DeRay and team will follow up with legal, and I don't know if that's Brian or Lamont or others, and RFA to just make sure that the language we have in our policy, in our real estate policy around affordable housing is to clarify to see if we need clarification to indicate that it only applies where we have a controlling interest.
On the policy side, yeah.
So that's just getting clarification. And then the last one, which is kind of general, that also came up during the board meeting, was just around making sure that we've got, I think, process and maybe reporting back to the committee on any comp or benchmarking changes that are the result of policy changes we consider, and just, maybe just making sure the committee's aware that those have been completed.
Great.
Okay.
Sounds like you're ready to be an attorney, Joy.
Okay, so item number 11 is our draft agenda for the next item, or for draft agenda for the next committee meeting in July. Chris.
Thanks, Joy. A couple of changes. Obviously, we had gotten ahead of ourselves and listed a couple of, under item 4, a couple of those policies as second readings, when in fact they would be first readings, the SIS and the fixed income risk budgets, if we're able to bring those. And then we'll have the second readings. It is important the committee would adopt its work plan for next year. And you saw that in the consent agenda. We're recommending 2 key efforts. One is to continue to invest and expand the collaborative model 2.0. And then the other is to really take a march towards a low carbon portfolio into the future. And I think we have more on that. We do have the business plan, so it's a full agenda. We'll make those very concise, 1 page at a glance, double-sided again, and keep that presentation as tight as possible. We have the private equity policy. And then we also want to take some time, if you allow us, to present our diversity plan. We have really, we've been at that for 20 years, but we've really had, with new leadership, made a change, and want to present at least our initial launch of really our diversity plan for the next year.
Chris, I've got a couple of speakers or committee members. So Sharon and then Harry.
Great, thanks, Joy. And Chris, I just wanted to kind of add, I know it's a full agenda for July, but I prepared a couple of remarks because I've been thinking about this for quite some time now, but I know many of us on this board are engaged on climate change issues on different boards that we serve on, and that our board's been, listening to public comment and engage with our stakeholders around some of these issues. And it's just, it's clear there's this growing intersectionality between what's happening in the world with, racial, gender, income inequality, how that interfaces with climate. And, I think it's just clear it's an existential risk for us on the planet. It's a risk for us as an asset owner at CalSTRS. And I know all of us as board members read a lot of the same documents and journals and newspapers and listen to public radio. And it's just a watershed moment right now. The timing is right for, I think, us at CalSTRS to be a little more bold and ambitious. And I really appreciate the public comment today. And I know Jane and her husband have been engaged with us for 7+ years. And I really appreciate some of the stats that she raised from the UN. And I guess I'd like to see staff come back with a more ambitious plan than just kind of, I think the conversation always is between divestment and engagement. And I personally think that we should make a bolder commitment and look at decarbonizing our portfolio and set a timeline that's more ambitious. Even maybe that we see in other organizations. I believe Jane quoted the UN, and I think their goal is 2050. And I'd love to see us maybe make a more ambitious, like 2040 goal or something like that. Obviously, I want to talk to the board and get staff and our consultants input. But and then we might need to revise and look at our divestment policy. But Joy, I'd request that we add something on the July Investment Committee agenda, something for our committee, the Investment Committee, to review, discuss, analyze, recommendations. We've had a lot of education, and I think the time now is for action and to make decisions in terms of our portfolio. Look at our, we have a new board fiduciary council that has expertise in the climate area, and explore a range of options for how we can get to net zero by 2040, and just have it be more clear what our goals are, what are the benchmarks and metrics to get us there, and then share that with the public when appropriate, so that we can be held accountable to that goal over time. I think that it was mentioned, I think by you, Chris, and others, about COP26 that's happening this fall. It's the UN Climate Change Conference in November. Many of us are going to be participating in that. It's a huge focus to talk about this push for net zero emissions. And I think we at CalSTRS have an incredible opportunity with all of the different hats that we wear to be a real profound voice in that conversation and share in the ambition, share in the solutions. And so, and I think what I sense has been missing at times is having there be benchmarks or kind of mileposts along the way, and then having an ambitious goal that we can get to, and have our staff and our consultants and others help us kind of push us. And I appreciate the public pushing us in this direction, because I think we, the reality is we need to move faster, but we want to also be prudent fiduciaries. And so figuring out how to balance those two pieces, I think, are going to be important. So this risk is here. We need to take action. We're the largest teachers' pension fund. And so, Joy, with your approval, I would suggest that we put something on the July Investment Committee agenda that starts to look at this goal of net zero by 2040, or whatever the IC, our investment committee, decides to set as a goal. But I would propose something like that that's a little more ambitious than what we see from other organizations, because I believe our staff and our team can make it happen. So.
Thank you, Sharon. And I, as Chris mentioned, I think we have, we have a sort of the basics of the work plan that talked about how we want to act on the transition to a low carbon economy. But I think, putting a lot more, so putting some detail on that in terms of how we're getting there. There's great work that I think we've done, issues that we've discussed in the committee. But I think, Chris, perhaps what we can do is in the context of, of our work plan for the upcoming fiscal year, it's, getting into detail about how we move toward net zero, which includes actions like we just took with Exxon, because I think, having, decarbonizing our own portfolio, moving in that direction, will happen only if those we invest in are moving in that direction as well. So, that kind of continued engagement will be important, along with just being able, I think, to measure and set appropriate goals for ourselves. So, I think that we'll, we, look forward to the conversation, look forward to input from others, others on the committee, as we take a look at what the staff might come back with in July. Again, anticipating that we won't have all the answers, but I think, even things as basic as, sort of measuring, measuring our portfolio. You can't manage what you don't measure, right? So starting with some fundamental concepts like that, I think that we can review, discuss, and then think about how we implement going forward. Great. Harry, you'd had your hand up earlier, but I think it's down now. Do you have a comment or?
I don't, Madam Chair. Something I communicate at another time. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our open session. Samantha, is there anybody in the queue for public comment?
There are no members of the public in queue.
Okay, great. Well, I think this might be a record that we are only 5 minutes over on our investment committee meeting. So have a wonderful lunch break to all of you. Keep that in mind for the afternoon. We'll try to do the same in the afternoon if we can. We'll be starting up closed session at 1 o'clock. So just ask everybody to check in ahead of time so that we're ready to go. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Committee, the investment committee met in closed session, and I'm just here to report that there were no actions taken during our closed session today. Thank you very much, and we'll either see you at our investment committee meeting in July or at other board meetings tomorrow. Thanks.